Right. Thank you for coming. And unlike everyone else I've seen, I don't actually have a line that says all these opinions are mine. Oh, sorry. Get back into the phone. I walk around a lot, so I imagine I'm going to get a lot of pointing. Okay, great. Yeah, the opinions stated here are my own and not those necessarily of Lloyd's banking group, my employer. So I thought I'd start off with what is fairness, going with a bit of a Wikipedia definition, maybe not the most sort of regimented, but definitely the one that I usually use when talking about it. And I thought, as opposed to reading slides, I'll sort of talk more about my story and why I got involved in data ethics and fairness in particular. I think my previous life, I was involved in sort of governance and process design. So now I can tell my mum what I do and show her Netflix documentaries like The Social Dilemma and Coded Bias, which gives her some sort of clue about what the work I do, how it impacts those around me and hopefully society. I'm deeply passionate about the topic of fairness. I think it ties into so many different elements of the society around us, and I think it is really pivotal to the success of artificial intelligence, is that we don't take the maybe limited trust, though it is limited, we do have some trust still with our use of machine learning, and if we want to keep that, we need to look at topics like fairness, explainability, transparency very, very carefully. So I've shamelessly stolen a illustration you might have seen before, talking about the differences between equality, equity, justice, and inequality. This is very politically leaning. So the last image, you'll notice it suggests fixing a broken system, implying that systems previously are broken, which not necessarily every libertarian will agree with. But definitely what it's trying to get across is that there is no one definition of fairness, and it can be done badly. And it really is sort of central to how we move artificial intelligence forward, because without fairness, how can we have trust? So if we don't know that our systems are fair, how can we trust the machine learning that's being applied to our lives every day? If we don't know about it within the financial services context, how do we avoid conduct or reputational risk as various things get into the media? I'm sure you've all seen various stories about various instances of machine learning being biased in sort of ways that would be seen as unethical. The one that I enjoyed most recently was in the Metro, talking about the Mo tax. So a taxi driver in, I think it was Coventry, was applying for business taxi insurance for his car, and the range of quotes he got 5 quotes from 5 different companies, but in one set of applications he put his name as John, his last name is Smith, and in the other set of applications he put his actual name, which is Muhammad, and his last name Smith, and the differences in the largest variation in quotes was £973 difference for him based on him changing his first name. So some insurance model somewhere, or all of the 5 companies were using his first name as a feature, which is not something that happened 5 years ago. This happened last year in August, I think. So fairness is not abstract in a financial services context. It is today, and it is happening right now. Our credit risk models are all based on personal data, and very few of us know whether those models have historical biases against certain protected demographics. Certainly, the amount of testing we do sort of today isn't extensive about that. I'm just going to grab some water. Sorry about the framing here. I'm going to see if this creates an incredible deluge on the floor. Right, so stepping forward, how does unfairness happen? One of the things that I saw, the head of the ethical AI department in Twitter actually quit after it came to light that his view was the only real problem with fairness in machine learning is biased historical data. And it enraged a number of activists, including some with some very high media profiles, who took to Twitter to tell him in no uncertain terms that he didn't know what he was talking about. And for this very reason, the slide's sort of cut off. It should serve me right for trying to use every possible inch of a slide. However, I used to be a consultant, so you can take the consultant out of finance, but not make tighter PowerPoint. Not sure where that joke was going. Please bear with me. Right, so this is, at the top, it's giving a sort of graphical interaction or description of how a model pipeline works, and at the bottom it's talking about different areas where bias can enter the system. The first one is looking at sample bias, so historical bias, so the fact that we may not, in the past, have been completely ethical with our application of processes, products, services. So it is kind of well known that people have inherent biases within our psychology. These biases are not because people are evil, they are because we have certain evolutionary benefits to those biases. We don't like the way that disabled people look, unfortunately, because they look like they might be sick. And being close to sick people in our evolution might not have been good for us. So our unconscious repels us from that. We have a disgust response, which has nothing to do with whether you're a nice person or not. It's inbuilt in our genetics. We need to do everything we can to overcome that, because that's not an acceptable response in society based on our current ethics. But that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And we know from several researchers into financial service that racism is still very prevalent. It is still very present on both sides of the Atlantic based on studies they've done. And that might be racism which comes in the application, so tellers, people in banks making decisions and judgments on people that come into the stores, or they can be baked into our system designs, the fact we still have a very male and white-led design sort of systems within financial service. That can also create a lot of bias. So it's not just about your historical data, though that can very much include it. How we measure and label is really important. The most common quoted is around the, I'm going to forget the actual name, but the sort of appropriateness filter on Instagram. So the way that they sort of decided which content would automatically be taken down for nudity or inappropriate sexual nature was determined by, I think it was a team of 2 people, both of them white males. So it was their idea of what was inappropriate for them to do labeling. And also, one of those males has come out and said about the trauma that this labeling caused in him, because he had to look at images of children, he had to look at images of, mutilation. It was not a very kind thing to do. But certainly the diversity in how they decided to label that data to make decisions was not there and not thought about, which can be a source of bias. Model pipeline bias, so a lot of people have talked about feature engineering. So the art of feature engineering is very subjective. It is definitely not as machine-like as we like to imagine. It is definitely based on people's preferences within a design team and also a business unit's idea of what is okay or not to include as features. These features can contain bias, but very much the choice of which to use is very much a human decision. There's other things in terms of how you transform data, so how you approach averages, how you approach nulls, how you do outlier treatment. These are all things that can lead to bias. And the application, so both data drift, so as you either retrain or not your model, there might be bias that comes in based on that new data being fed to the model. But much more common is that, they've done studies in healthcare in particular, how doctors will ignore model recommendations based on what they perceive that patients need to be, and sometimes in actually quite a reactionary way. So they will go completely against what the model is predicting because of their preconceived biases, which have shown to exhibit elements of ageism, of sexism, of racism. So application of these models once we actually put them into the wild is also very important, especially if you think about in financial context, how people will take recommendations for product provision, so next best action type stuff. And the title of the presentation is about what sort of challenges do we face in the application of fairness. I've got 2 slides. There are lots of factors. I'm not going to talk through them all. If you'd like to talk about any of them at length, I'm very passionate and I talk a lot. So as long as you don't mind getting no edgeway into the conversation, please come find me in the breaks. But there are a lot of headwinds when it comes to the actual topic of fairness. This is even before you start talking about how you actually apply it day to day within your firm. But I just wanted to call out a few of these. So fairness is both a technical problem and a social problem. There is a huge desire from leadership inside financial services to get fairness done and to do it, and it should be applied to all models, and then it will be fine. That's not fine. Because fairness is a very subjective, very based on your use case, based on your data problem, because of what I was showing you before, the different places where unfairness can enter into a pipeline, how you measure that and what you decide to do about it, these are all subjective social decisions. There is no one single definition of fairness. We have different views on what fairness equality means. So especially in a risk-based industry like we are, we believe that it's fine if we have a certain amount of prejudice towards against younger people in accessing financial services and products and also paying higher premiums. As a society, we accept that to be okay. Not every society agrees with us. So around the world in different countries where they view younger people with more, I don't know, fondness? I'm not sure of the word, but with less of the other angle, so Germany, for example, they don't charge their young people as much for premiums as we do, even with the risk, because they think that it's appropriate to not penalize them for being young and being risk-taking. So in Germany, you actually start off with a better credit score and you lose points, as opposed to our system where you build up credit score over time. So we have different definitions of what fair even is and what we should do about it, which makes mitigating unfairness when we come across it very difficult to decide on what you're actually going to do. Are you actually going to reweigh your historical training data to favor those people that have been previously discriminated against, even though you can point at nothing which says this isn't going to cost you more money and decrease the accuracy of your products? What business stakeholder is brave enough to make that decision? It's a very interesting question. Historical bias is encoded and is very difficult to detect. So understanding the interrelation between features and protected characteristics is not easy. And I think one of the things I said, yeah, I'm talking about the next slide, so I won't jump ahead too much, but it's biases everywhere. And on time, I'm doing okay. All right, so application headwinds. So these are more headwinds to do with the actual application of fairness as opposed to fairness as a topic. So again, I'm only going to talk about a few of these, but I'll let you guys sort of scan through them quickly. The key thing, so the previous slide was talking about why fairness is difficult. This is talking about why doing fairness is difficult. And if I just circle, and I am sharing slides. I'm not sure how they get to you, but please don't feel free. Feel free to take photos if you like, though I can't imagine the resolution. And I don't go through my photos of my kids enough, let alone photos from conferences. Number one, change teams haven't done this before. So this is not, I've not met anyone who's told me I have applied fairness metrics on 20 products within my company. It is typically done in a limited context right now on our most important models you can imagine, credit risk or insurance underwriting. The concepts behind fairness are complex. For someone to be able to decide what fairness metric to choose, whether they're going to go with equalized odds or equal opportunity, if you don't understand the concepts that sit behind the maths of that, how are you going to make a decision? Because it is a decision, they are actually in conflict at times. There's no one fairness metric that always works. Development teams aren't always experienced in change. Like this is true even of software developers where in universities they teach them about the software lifecycle. Often data scientists don't know what a software lifecycle is because they've not really coded software. So trying to talk to them about fairness and how much documentation, how much you have to document why you chose the fairness metric can sometimes hit a lot of resistance. We also don't gather many types of demographic data, so we don't ask people when they join the bank what sexuality they are. They wouldn't trust us necessarily with giving us that data, and what reason would we have to ask? But if we don't have that data, we can't test our models. So right now, my team are looking at trying to find proxies in our data for ethnic origin so that we can actually test our products for how they perform in race. And we're really worried about our legal position on it, because if we've categorized someone as belonging to a particular ethnic minority, if they do a subject access request on us through GDPR, do we have to provide that or not? So we're looking at how we aggregate the data so we don't have to, but how would that sort of look? It's very tricky. Okay, so what should we do about it? I'm not going to read out all these again. You might see a common theme there. So we need to introduce standards. I actually think that where we are, certainly when I talk to other people in financial services, we're pretty good at introducing the standards, at trying to have a list of policies or principles that say, here's what we should do within our firm. We're not so good at the next one, which is introducing processes. So you need to have something detailed enough for a data scientist who doesn't know what you're talking about to follow, and hopefully follow that by themselves in a way that you don't have to train them for 3 days before they're able to do this process. So I think that's certainly where me and my team are focusing most of our time on, is how do we build those processes and how do we make sure they have access to something which is easy enough to use out of the box so they can sort of make those tough decisions like choosing fairness metrics. What else? So we have done a lot to expand accountable roles. I was going to say something else here. Yeah, creating or purchasing tooling. I think it's important that you do have some sort of out-of-the-box tooling that you can give to teams to say, here's how you do this, because otherwise they're going to have to research individually what different fairness metrics are, what different mitigation techniques are available, what open source libraries they should use, how to bring those into your firm. It's much better if you have sort of a de facto standard, although you'll need to make sure that works on multiple platforms. And creating training and doing a sort of how do I say this without saying propaganda? Doing some sort of brainwashing of executives so that they actually know the right questions to ask. If you're taking a new topic, which is quite complicated, but does have impact for our customers, how much training are you doing into your senior executive population so that they can actually ask development teams the right questions to drive priority into this sort of work, so it doesn't become the last thing that the teams do before they go live? And the last one before I finish. So the fairness approach summary. So this is a overview of the fairness approach we're using today within Lloyd's. So we've broken it into 4 stages. The first one's about building your framework, which is all about how do you identify what are the possible harms from this product that we're looking to put artificial intelligence or machine learning within. How do you identify what groups you would like to choose between? Going into analyzing, so how do you actually get your fairness testing data? That shouldn't be underestimated because it is a difficult endeavor. How do you find out what metrics, what groups you can actually test between? And then choosing your metrics and your thresholds. This 80-20 rule seems to be taking prevalence across the world, or it's okay if the performance of a model is 20% worse for black people versus white people. I'm not sure who decided that 20% okay is okay. It doesn't always seem like it should be that way to me, but definitely it's what we're seeing. But it should be a conversation, right? And you should document why that limit seems okay for your use case, which might be really hard to write down. We're okay with a little bit of racism. We're okay with a little bit of sexism. Difficult stuff. Going on to mitigate and productionize. So identifying root causes and mitigation. So I could talk for another hour on, or probably more, on the different ways of mitigating, because they're not simple. They very much should be exploration and analysis based. So you have to think back to that point of where do we think in the modeling pipeline this unfairness has come into the process, and what are we going to do about it? Because sometimes it's going to be trying to find better features, sometimes it's going to be dropping features, but also sometimes it's going to be looking at model types and the way that it's finding parameters and whether we can change those in some sort of way to optimize thresholds or do correlation removal to try and find different techniques in the modeling, if we think it's the model where the bias is coming from. But yeah, very detailed, complex source of lots of academic papers. But also, definitely something we don't see very much in the thinking is that once you've done this one-off analysis of, is my credit risk model biased, what are you actually going to do over time to make sure that's an operational approach? And who in the business have you actually talked to about what they're going to do if one day the model starts being out of tolerance? Because, if that does happen, you should have a plan, as opposed to just it happens one day and you don't know whether you're going to turn the model off or not. Those sort of conversations should be happening. Right. So takeaways. So fairness is critical to getting the benefits of machine learning, at least in my very biased opinion. Several places exist in the pipeline, and we should know about those things. We should put those into common knowledge so people understand it's not just about historical data being biased. Where there are actually headwinds. So if you don't plan for those headwinds, you will stutter and not get the processes in place as quickly as you could do. We need to take tangible steps to introduce standards, processes, oversight, and capability. We're not going to succeed as quickly as we could do if we don't do that. And thank you. I really want to talk to people about their own approaches to fairness. So if I'm not selling anything, which unlike most people who put time in my diary, they typically are. So I would love to talk to people if we're just okay in a very, way which does not expose any of our companies to risk or sharing of secrets, but to share knowledge and learnings about how we've applied this. I'd be really interested in that. And although I'm talking about fairness today, the other half of my life is explainability and transparency, so I'd be very happy to talk to anyone about that as well. Time for questions. Thank you.